Thanks very much, John, for agreeing to have this chat today. I'm really fascinated to learn more about the work that you're doing. It's the stuff that you've been doing online is of great interest to me. So I want to have a wee bit the opportunity to delve into that with you today, and also to get to the point to have a chat about the book that you wrote, the social organisation, and how that has come out of the work that you've been doing. So if you could maybe introduce yourself and tell us a wee bit about your involvement in you talked about change management as something you've been involved with for quite some time. So do you want to give us a wee bit of a potted history of Jon Ingham?
First of all, Colin, can I just say, yes, delighted to be talking to you, and clearly you have been and are doing lots of interesting work in this space as well. So yeah, we're really enjoying our conversations. So I started my career in IT consulting, so I think that might be why I've maintained a bit of an interest in technologies throughout my career. And in fact, that's sort of how change management came about. So I was doing change management on technology-based projects so I was working with Anderson Consulting, now Accenture, and although I was a C++ expert at the time, I was doing some user acceptance testing. And when Anderson decided to set up this change management services group, I was incorporated in it, which was one of my earliest experiences of not how to do change management, really. And this was a long time ago, as you can probably tell from the slight sort of white beard and lack of hair. It was basically while Margaret Thatcher was leading the wave of privatisation in previously public sector governmental organisations. So I started doing a lot of culture change, working with the Central Electricity Board becoming National Power and Powergen and similar types of project. And eventually figured out that actually most of my work really wasn't very much to do with IT at all. Most of my clients weren't in IT. They were these strange people called HR, or perhaps personnel as it was then, really. I actually got a job to do change management, but as an HR director for EY, firstly in the UK, doing a lot of strategic HR change projects with them. I was an HR director for the former Soviet Union for a couple of years. Came back to the UK, led or was head of HR consulting for a large UK-based consultancy, and have been working independently for the last sort of 10 years. So yeah, these days, consulting, training, conference speaking, writing, and all around a strategic approach to people management and organisation effectiveness, and often with a focus around human capital. So how do we develop and grow our people and ensure they have the right skills and they're effectively motivated and so on, but increasingly around social capital. So how do we also ensure that we're developing effective connections, relationships, conversations between people, as the point of performance is ever more groups, teams and networks rather than simply individuals. One of the questions I asked when I moved into HR for the first time 20 years ago was, why is it, if the point of performance is the team, so much of what we do in HR focuses on managing, developing, rewarding the performance of individuals? It didn't make sense then, and in today's world it absolutely doesn't.
Okay, can we tease that out a wee? This is great. This idea about social capital and team, and the juxtaposition between the individual and HR and team and HR, and that transition that is beginning, that has happened over time, because you talked about previously it was personnel, then it was HR, and now it's kind of people are beginning to talk about people analytics. So I think what you're talking about there, about this, and you were talking about it 20 years ago, so I'd like to explore a wee bit more about that and how that relates to organizational design and the impact on the organization.
Okay.
Big question.
That's a big agenda. A couple of quick responses to that, and then sort of tell me where you want to go. But yeah, HR has been on a journey, as all areas of business have. The key one, trying to become more strategic, have a bigger, well, not deliberately to have a bigger role, but realizing that people have become more central to an organization, and therefore HR's challenge has been how it responds to that increasing importance of people by taking a more central role in enabling businesses to compete on the people that they have. So that's sort of HR's strategic agenda. And I do think that is why, firstly, some HR people at least are becoming more interested in social capital. And my book, The Social Organisation, whilst I say that is mainly written from an HR perspective, I define HR in that as human relationships rather than human resources, because I think that shift has been happening. Organisation design, I think, comes from the same place, that as HR has wanted to become, has in many cases been successful in becoming more strategic. Its focus has developed beyond simply focusing on the individual to thinking about the broader organization. And it's becoming clearer and clearer that you can have well-skilled and motivated people working in an organization, and the organization can still perform very badly if we're not organizing people in the right way.
Why do you think it's becoming more prominent? What is the change that's pushing us in that direction?
The growing amount of knowledge we have available to us means that all fields are increasingly specialised. So within HR, the traditional model for HR, where you have specialists, service centre, business partners interfacing different departments. Increasingly, you were mentioning analytics. We have analytics specialists. We have a lot of organisation development specialists, organisation design specialists, and so on. You need to specialise to have a worthwhile role inside an organisation, and ideally you need breadth as well. So this idea about the T-shaped person with a breadth across the organisation, good soft skills, but deep specialism in at least one area. I mean, 2 or 3 areas is great as well. But if you're simply a generalist, it's very difficult to have a significant impact on the business, because you need to keep up to speed with all of that developing knowledge and insight within different fields. So that's sort of one trend that's been underway for about 20 years. But at the same time, life, business, the universe has become much more complex. Partly because everything is sort of connected through relationships, and as soon as you take a relationship view, you realise that things are a lot more complex than if you simply have a look at a more superficial perspective. So as things have become more complex, dealing with issues in organisations increasingly needs a cross-functional, cross-disciplinary perspective. So therefore, the only way that you can deal with that, if you have specialists rather than generalists, is pull specialists together into teams or networks or whatever it may be. Yep. And I think that trend, which has been underway for maybe about 20 years or more, is currently being accelerated by the introduction of digital technology, or at least for organisations sort of planning for the future of work and understanding where things are heading. Because clearly a lot of what the work that can be done individually, whether that's manual, production-oriented, or even sort of knowledge base, is increasingly going to be automated or increasingly supported, and therefore done more efficiently and more effectively and efficiently through AI and so on. So one of the points I make again in the book, in The Social Organisation, is that my suggestion, this focus on many organisations on Peter Drucker's knowledge worker, I think is nearing the end of its relevance. And my suggestion is that these days the key people in businesses aren't knowledge workers, but relationship workers. So people who use relationships, work through relationships, and the output of their activity is relationships. We're acting in the social age. And all of that, I think, is a basis, firstly, of the specialist generalist issue, plus taking account of AI, trying to push up to higher levels of value, which are increasingly about values and morals, change management, creativity, and relationships. So, all of that is moving things in the direction we've been describing.
Okay, so could you maybe give us some examples of the work that you've been doing, and some of the lessons that you've learned on your journeys?
Sure. Right. So what I've been doing. So during the last year, one of my clients was an urban regeneration consultancy, a fairly small organisation. And because it was fairly small and still, although I mean it's not new, but in some ways it still acts a little bit like a startup. So it didn't really have any formal structure in place. So people come in, they go out on project teams, they finish a project team, they go on a different project team, but there's no sort of central organisation. And traditionally in professional services firms, you'd have probably had a sort of functional structure behind that. So when I was at Ernst & Young, we had a department for auditors and tax consultants and corporate finance people and so on. And this client didn't have any of that. So we've been exploring with them how I and some associates could put in place a community and network-based structure. Very much focused around building social capital, providing a counterpoint to the focus on teams, with a more sort of an organizational backdrop to that, enabling people to develop broader connectedness across the organization, greater relatedness, and a sense of belonging in the organization, which was missing. So quite a bit of my work is sort of on organizational changes. I've been working from a leadership development perspective as well with a university in the UK, designing, planning, implementing some leadership interventions to help their senior leaders think about leading from a sort of network perspective, both internally as well as externally, rather than in that sort of traditional sort of command and control style. What else? I've been working with another client on their HR processes, looking at innovating those if we start focusing on how those processes develop social capital rather than human capital. So one of my, a couple of beliefs that I bring to the HR field is firstly the importance of best fit rather than best practice. So I'm always trying to sort of identify ways of doing things in a particular organization rather than just copying what other people do.
Okay.
And secondly, that even despite the fact so much is changing at the moment with digital technologies and so on, the real opportunities to innovate inside an organization, I always think come more from trying to organically align with what the business is trying to do, rather than sort of trying to artificially disrupt from inside. So the tendency tends to be, look, we've got artificial intelligence, all of this sort of stuff. How can we bolt that on and do things differently? Which to some extent we do need to do, and that can provide competitive advantage in its own right. But I think the most fundamental transformational changes can be by focusing more clearly on what we're trying to create, the outcomes that we're creating in our people and organization, primarily human or social, and human and social capital, using those to not just support but to drive the business forward. So thinking, how can we create new social capital that will enable the business to be even more successful than it's planning to be, and then aligning all of our activities with inside the organization to achieving those things. So if you replace, or at least reprioritize social capital rather than simply human capital as the outcome that you're trying to create, then basically all of your internal HR management and other processes change completely. It's a fundamental transformational innovation. How do you do performance management, for example, if it's not the individual which is important, but work is taking place through teams and communities?
Do you have an answer to that?
Well, I'm getting there. Well,
I mean,
for a start, of course, there is no one single answer because, again, it's best fit rather than best practice. So yeah, each organisation needs to do the hard work and identifying for itself how things need to change.
But in a way, what I meant, John, was how do you demonstrate it? Because I completely agree with you that it has to be relevant to the purpose of the organisation and the context of the organisation. But how do you prove to the organisations you work with that the shift has been worth it and that they can, in order to ensure that they maintain this change? So because we know that change is essentially most of them fail, and that can take several years for them to fail. So how do you ensure that you're building it into the culture so that it becomes part of who they are?
Right. Again, another very interesting and quite a big question. And of course, the change management piece fails because organisations don't take enough account of social capital. So, but let's come back to that if you want to, or you can leave that for another conversation another time. Well, I mean, that leads back to the point about analytics that you were raising earlier. And we were talking about the shift from personnel to human resources, now people analytics. To me, analytics, again, isn't a separate thing. It's just as HR has tried to become more strategic, understanding our data and analysing that data to provide insight becomes more important too. But again, the analytics needs to depend on the outcomes that we're trying to create. That's where, to me, organisation network analysis with inside an organisation comes in. That if what we've been trying to do was to create human capital, then the analytics need to be things like engagement surveys. They're focused on the individual. If what we're trying to create is social capital, it's the value of the connections and relationships, then the analytics need to be social too. So, why run an engagement survey when you're interested in social capital, not human capital? It just doesn't make sense, does it? You need to do things like organisation network analysis to understand the connections and relationships so you can intervene in that area. But again, I'd also link the best fit thing into that. So it's not just sort of doing organisation network analysis and reporting benchmarks around brokerage ratios or whatever it may be. It's identifying what the organisation's trying to do and linking back to that. So my suggestion for how organisations show the return on this type of thing is firstly be really clear on the objectives that they're trying to meet for the activities they're undertaking and the outcomes that they want to create. To identify how they're going to measure those things and put in place the relevant measurement mechanisms to get the data against those measures. So again, I so often have this sort of conversation about, okay, so let's do the plan, identify what you want to do. Oh, that's interesting. Increasingly you want to create social capital. How are you going to measure that? Well, we could use our engagement survey. Well, you could, but it's sort of, it's putting the cart before the horse. If what you want, again, it's you it starts with your objective, then you identify the measures against the objectives, and then you have the right measurement mechanism to give you those measures, get the data, and then you can do analytics based upon those things. So to me, it's that sort of funnel. So it's like any evaluation. If you're not clear what you're trying to do, you can't evaluate. As long as you're clear enough about your initial objectives, and then you follow that logic, and you do the analytics based upon that logic, then you should be able to provide enough evidence for your stakeholders that you are or you're not doing the right thing.
Okay, and that's also related to performance and productivity, I assume.
Yes, absolutely. Well, again, it depends what's going to be important to you. But I think we are understanding through individual analytics studies inside organizations and broader academic research that more of that performance and productivity than we had probably realized until fairly recently is down to social factors inside organizations. So performance, we're getting better at measuring in a very objective way, but I still think we lose track very often that the causes of that performance are often the way that people are networked with inside an organization. So you can look at Boris Groysberg's research, for example, looking at where people identified as stars in one organization move from one to another, the chances, the correlation between whether they're identified as talent in the first and second organization, is generally pretty low, because it's not about them as an individual, it's about the network and the communities they have that they're working within. So performance is social, productivity is social. But it's about each organisation working out what those causal links are for that particular organisation, using techniques like organisation network analysis as appropriate to try to understand how things are working and how they can be improved.
Okay, and before I ask you a bit about your book, I thought if you could let us know what is there a sort of a common theme which brings your clients to you, and is it the kind of thing that you want to deliver, or is it are they coming to you thinking we're going to do HR, and then there's a sort of a conversation about really what it's needed?
All of my work is pull based, so I don't really do any sort of specific promotion or business development activity, but I invest time in having interesting conversations like this, because I believe in the power of connection and social capital and interesting conversation. Certainly the bulk of my work is developed through
recommendation,
a potential client having had some sort of connection, whether it's they've read my book or they've seen me at a conference or whatever. We'll have a conversation. Very often that conversation will start with the particular thing that I've been discussing wherever they came across me, but then we aim to have a conversation about what would be most useful for them. And certainly the projects that I'm most proud of have generally been where we've engaged together, and we've talked about the possibilities, and we've explored things, and sometimes we have used internal analytics and external research, not to benchmark and to sort of tell us what to do, but simply to inform and inspire and provoke our thinking. And we've ended up with a conclusion that possibly would have been completely different to what either of us would have sort of come up with independently. A lot of the time that is around HR, because that is my main focus. But either because of the approach I take, or because of that increasing complexity and interdisciplinary perspective I was talking about before, very often that will include linked areas. So I've done some work in and around the digital workplace. The physical workplace design, I think, is increasingly an important part of an organization's architecture as well. People and organization strategy, whatever it may be.
Okay. So thanks very much. It's been fascinating talking to you. If you could tell us a wee bit about your book, perhaps what prompted you to write it, and what was your motivation for writing the book, the social organisation?
Thank you, and thank you for your time, Colin, because I've enjoyed ranting at you, but I must return the favour sometime, and it'd be and get my own back on you as well, and ask some similarly tough questions. The book. I blog extensively. People can follow my articles on LinkedIn, or I have a blog called Strategic HCM, Human Capital Management. And indeed, actually, that followed my first book, which was called Strategic Human Capital Management, which was about human capital. So look, I know lots of organizations don't like the term human capital, and social capital sometimes gets the same criticism, that it seems a bit clunky and jargonistic for something which is primarily about people and promoting a more humanistic, people-centric way of working. I can see why people don't like the term, but it's a humanistic, progressive concept. The idea of human capital management for me is that we're managing and developing people in a way that will create and accumulate human capital, that will enable us to drive the business forward. And to me, where I've tried to bring in this approach of human capital management, it's helped us completely innovate the way that we do HR and management in an organization, because it leads us to think about people as the true center of an organization, and investing in people as the future of the business, rather than sort of coming from a more efficiency oriented perspective. So in that book, 12 years or so ago, I did write one page about social capital. And in fact, as I said, the capabilities inside an organization, human capital, which I'm focusing on now. There is also organization capital, so the quality of the way we organize our people. But there's this other thing, social capital, which I don't really understand. So I can't, a page was about as much as I could do at the time. But if I'm right that the point of performance is probably the team rather than individual, then that sort of makes sense that social capital is actually even more important than everything I've been writing about in this book. And therefore my next book, which I was sort of planning for about 2 years later, is going to be on social capital. It took me 12 years, but so that was sort of the reason for the second book. The social organization, if I had written it 10 years ago, it would have focused mainly on social technologies. But coming back to it 10 years later, I was sort of thinking, well, we sort of understand how we can make enterprise social technologies work effectively, at least sort of better than we did 10 years before. But the big challenge today, for some of the reasons we've been talking about, and certainly some more of the sort of topical aspects of organizations and social capital, I think, are the organization changes. So most of the book is about how we balance the traditional way of organizing around functions and divisions with horizontal teams, communities and networks. There's a whole chapter on the physical workplace, social digital technologies, organization development interventions, where we facilitate effective relationships and manage conflict and so on. There's quite a bit about social organization network analysis as well. So the whole sort of it's that thing I was talking about before, that if you shift your focus on creating social capital as the outcome rather than human capital, everything else changes. So the book is sort of everything else, how we manage people in an environment where it's not just the people we need to invest in, it's the relationships between the people as well.
Okay, fascinating. Well, I'm sure lots of people will want to get access to that, so I guess they can get it on your website or Amazon or...
well, the publisher is Kogan Page, so they can get it from that site or from Amazon or similar online stores.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jon. It's been great talking to you. Really enjoyed it, and I hope to have an opportunity maybe to reciprocate, as you said.
I'd really enjoy that. Yeah, we must do so.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you.